How does shale gas impact our society's fight against global warming / climate change?
Well, first of all, I'm going to suggest that the premise of the question is a problem. First of all, it helps us that there's a global warming theory, because that theory lends us the opportunity to prove what we can do to contribute to that by reducing carbon emissions. However, I want to emphasize that that premise is a bet. It's not a certainty. I know it's a religion to a lot of people, but it is a certainty. But the fact is that the climate change group out of England just released a report just a few weeks ago that said there's been no warming, and these are people who are advocates of dealing with the issue. There's been no warming for the last 16 years. None. That's longer. That pause is longer than the period of warming that preceded it. Prior to that, it was cooler. And I would also point out that we have to remember that there's no perfect temperature for the Earth. Modest warming can be beneficial. And that's a fact. In fact, it was warmer 1,000 years ago. And if you think it's hard to survive in a warming climate, think what it's like in a cooling climate. Change is constant. And what we have with this attempt to put everything into this context of fighting global warming is we're talking about a tremendous economic cost, primarily on poor countries of the world who are not developed yet as we are. That's the reality. When you say that we can't develop economically to use things like natural gas or coal or whatever, what you're saying is you're condemning those people to continuous poverty, and you're imposing a tremendous cost on them to satisfy our whims. And the result is, if you look at the data, we're talking about trillions of dollars of cost to get a minuscule change in climate that we don't even know that's possible. However, if we assume that there is global warming and there is a need to deal with this, we've got to remember a couple of things. And I would quote from a report issued on November 6th by the Congressional Research Service. It said, an apparent consequence of the shift to more natural gas-fired electric power generation in the first quarter of 2012 has been a decrease of U.S. carbon dioxide emissions by almost 8% to their lowest levels since 1992. That's a week old. And I would also point out, if we're really serious about this, if we're really going to focus on reality, China is bringing on one new coal plant every week. Every week. That's the reality. They're going to do this. We have an opportunity to do something better with natural gas. And we know, as a matter of fact, the Department of Energy says that, contrary to what Bob's study, which has been debunked by about 12 different universities and institutions, has zero credibility in the academic world, it's 53% less than coal, and 42%, even on his 20-year life cycle, 42% less than coal. Also, gas is more efficient than coal in terms of the carbon emitted and its conversion to electricity. Gas is a much better deal. We can, in fact, even the Sierra Club, which was critical of Bob's work, says the shale gas is less than coal, and it's about the same as conventional gas. I would point out also that if we're really serious about this, we look at what New York City is doing. And that's a key point. Let's look at what people are doing, not what they're saying, but what are they doing? New York City is converting to natural gas as fast as it can with its power plants that produce steam and other sources of energy. It's doing that because it wants to meet its global warming targets that it's established. And the way to do that is with natural gas. They know it. That's why they're doing it. And I would point out, when we look at, we talk about renewables, a number of people talk about that, who's not for renewables? But the fact is, they're not the solution to the problem in the short run. They certainly aren't. And all you have to do is look at Germany, where they're building coal plants at a tremendous rate, right now. Right now, they're building coal plants. Why? Because that's what they have to do to produce the energy. You can talk about the solar, you can talk about the wind, you can throw the data out, but in fact, you need the natural gas. Thank you.
Thank you. Respond.
Yeah, and just if you give me a 30-second warning, and I have no peripheral vision, so you're
okay. Actually, I'll just move over here.
I appreciate that. There's a lot I could respond to there. Let me put aside the personal aspects and deal with climate change. Climate change is real. the scientific community believes climate change is real. This afternoon, I was reading the very latest summary. 98% of Earth system scientists think climate change is real and an imminent danger to society. Over the last 50 years, the average temperature of the Earth has gone up 0.8 of a degree Celsius. We are on a trend, according to the IPCC, to go up to 1.5 degrees above the norm by 18 years from now, to 2 degrees above the long-term norm by 35 to 40 years from now. And those are dangerous temperatures because it puts us in the range of likely tipping points in the climate system where we will end up in some alternate steady state, which could be very, very damaging to society. So most all climate scientists say we need to keep the temperature at least below 20 degrees, probably below 1.5 degrees, and the time frame is short for working on that. Now, how do you keep the temperatures down? There's excellent new work on this by the World Meteorological Organization, by NASA Goddard Space Institute, by UNEP. All of this has come out in the last 15 months or so. The consensus of those reports is that you cannot keep the temperature below that range simply by dealing with carbon dioxide. If we aggressively go after carbon dioxide today, we're still in trouble. Methane and black carbon are the trick to keeping the temperatures low. Climate system is much more responsive to those. The only hope that society has of keeping a temperature below those ranges is to begin immediate methane emission control. Now, where does methane come from? Well, in the United States, the single largest source is the natural gas industry. It's probably true globally, although statistics aren't so good. And so, how do you cut it back? Well, you need to get the natural gas industry to put out less methane. Shale gas aggravates the methane emissions. It doesn't help. We need to be moving on to some other solution. I also want to add this argument about whether the latest Hurricane Sandy is a result of global warming or not. I'm not an expert on the meteorological aspect of that. I will say that there are mechanistic reasons to believe that storms will get more intense as the planet warms more. We have more energy in the surface oceans to drive it, with more water vapor in the atmosphere to drive it. With the melting of the Arctic ice, we are seeing pressure ridges going further to the north, which will result in the sort of front that caused the Sandy storm. It doesn't prove it, but it's the sort of thing one will expect. And Jim Hansen of NASA came out with a great paper in Nature very recently showing statistically that there has been an increase in the incidence of storms and freaky weather over the time that we've observed warming over the past 4 to 5 decades. The correlation is strong, the mechanism makes sense, the climate is going haywire because of climate change. So we need to reduce methane to take care of it. Do we have an option? Yes. And my friend Mark Jacobson at Stanford says that with existing technology, we could make the United States fossil fuel free by 2030. Now, a lot of people think he's ambitious, and I think he's ambitious. But it's time to be ambitious, because if we want to deal with global warming, that's what we need to do. The technology's there. We need some political leadership. But what happens if we go down this other path? The price of gas is very low. Very hard for any renewable energy to compete with that.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Very difficult for renewable energy to compete with gas as cheap as it is, so we continue to put the money into gas. We're not getting to where we need to be in the long run. It really is time to imagine that we're in the 21st century and kick our century-old addiction to fossil fuels. Shale gas just aggravates that addiction.
Thank you.
First of all, I noticed that he didn't defend his report. He didn't say anything about the statistics that I provided. He did not defend his report. And I think that's something you should take account of. In fact, when he estimated the amount of methane released in connection with natural gas development, he assumed that everything that didn't end up with end users was a loss that went into the atmosphere. Didn't account for the fact that a large percentage of that goes to run the equipment along the way. This is something that's been pointed out by, again, numerous other academic institutions. His report has been heavily criticized by Larry Kaplan here at Cornell, who virtually dismissed the entire report on the basis of faulty information. And I would point out that Bob himself indicates in his report that it's based on questionable data. So we convert back to the same point, and that is this, that natural gas produces less global warming, whether you're talking about methane or CO2, less global warming than coal. If you want to talk about making a contribution to this problem, whether it's a problem or not, if you want to make a contribution to it, then natural gas is the way to go. And the way you produce natural gas today is with fracking. And I'll just end with pointing out that, going back to the economics of this, you can't have a clean environment without a good economy. That's the fact. All you have to do is look at East Germany in past years and the tremendous amount of problems they had.
Thank you. Response?
Yes, please. I get the final 90 seconds, luckily. I stand by our report from April 2011. I stand by everything that's in that. We wrote a detailed response to various samples. We were invited by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy Assessment to join with Drew Shindell of NASA Goddard Space Institute, who also is the lead scientist in the next IPCC assessment, to talk about methane and global change. We wrote that report in the spring. There's increasing science which is coming out, which shows that we were conservative. The situation is worse than we thought. Now, that makes sense to me because we're purposely very conservative. I'm quite confident that the long term, our research will look fine. Did we say in our paper that the data were of low quality and questionable? Absolutely. Tony Ingraffia and Renee Santoro and I pulled together for the first time the best available data, and we did our best to interpret it. And again, I stand by that 18 months later. But one of our conclusions was, my God, this is lousy data because industry is so secretive. It's very hard to do this sort of thing. What is needed is more objective scientists getting up there in the field and making independent measurements. And I'm delighted to tell you that there are teams all over the world doing that now. And as their research comes in, we're learning amazing new things about how methane comes out of places you never would have imagined it came out.
I quickly add that Dominic was too polite to say this, but NOAA has measured methane emissions from a gas field in Colorado in excess of what they assumed in their paper. I mean, the data are fine.
Could I also make a mention of the fact that there has never been a single horizontal shale frac well in New York State. And that's because there's a moratorium on this practice pending adoption of comprehensive health and environmental safeguards. So for the last 4 years, no fracking in New York State. And until those safeguards are adopted, that moratorium simply continues. So that's a very, very important reality here in New York.
Okay, thank you. You'll get other opportunities.